Parasite is the most awarded and best reviewed film of the year.
I'm deadly serious.
Now nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. See why the New York Times hails Parasite as the movie of the year, and Bong Joon-ho may be the filmmaker of the century.
Is it okay with you?
Parasite, now available on demand.
Welcome, everybody, back to the Cinema Club podcast. We're on episode number 3, and I have been having so much fun on this. This week, we have a special episode for you all. This week, the movie was Parasite, and directed by Bong Joon-ho, and it was chosen by my very good and best friend, Chris Amick. So welcome, Chris, to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Nick, for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
And my second guest is a member of the Cinema Club. So please join the Cinema Club. So if you want to be a part of the podcast, join the Cinema Club, and I'd love to get you on here. And also, as a side note, this person also went to school with me at ECU. So welcome to the podcast, John.
Hey, how you doing? Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely glad to have you. I want to bring on as many members of the club as possible. So before we get into the synopsis and what the movie was about, and before we start our conversation, I just wanted to ask you, Chris, why did you choose this movie for the movie of the week this week?
This movie ended up being my favorite film of 2019. For a lot of reasons, but I think, it won a bunch of awards, which is great, including Best Film. But I still feel like some people don't watch this film or haven't seen this film yet. It's been out for quite some time, and I wanted people to kind of have that excuse, so to speak, to watch it. But also, you and I had talked about this film, I think, in December. I'd really encouraged you to watch it at that point, and I was kind of thinking you probably hadn't watched it yet, so I really wanted you to get an opportunity or excuse to check it out.
Yeah, I will freely admit that Chris brought up this movie like right when it came out. He saw it and was immediately like, Nick, you need to watch this film. And for months I've been like putting it off. And I have to admit that I am not the biggest international film fan. I don't watch it in my personal life. I have watched a few, say French New Wave films, but that was about it. Hadn't really seen any Korean films or any West Asian films. So East Asian films. So I was very apprehensive to watch this film, especially with subtitles. But when I watched it for this, I can say I was wrong completely and freely admit I was wrong. This was such a good movie, and I'm so glad that you chose this to be the movie of the week, and I'm so excited for us to talk about it because it has a lot of similarities to where we are in our country and as a world today, and it's such a poignant film for where we are and to talk about today. So I'm glad to have you guys to be a part of this.
Yeah, man. But yeah, I've heard about this film when I was watching the Oscars, and it was winning all these awards. And I was like, what's up with this film? And why isn't the Joker winning or Uncut Gem? And I just didn't, at the time, I was really suspicious about it. And I thought it was just like a PC move. But then I was like, no, I'm going to watch this movie. And so I watched it, and I was like, wow, this movie is pretty interesting, pretty amazing.
Exactly. So let's get into this. So it's a whopping 99% on Rotten Tomatoes, and the film, it starts with Ki-woo Kim as a young man living in poverty in the slums of a nameless South Korean city with his family, father Ki-tak Kim, mother Chun-soo Kim, and sister Ki-jung. The family lives in a very small apartment where they struggle to find a Wi-Fi signal to sneak in order to get access to the internet and watch TV. Eventually, they get fumigated on and have to watch men urinating in the alley outside their home. They make ends meet by doing menial tasks such as folding pizza boxes, and even then get criticized by the pizza employees for messing up on the boxes. Kiwoo's wealthy friend Min pays the family a visit, giving them a gift, a rock that is supposed to bring those who have it wealth and prosperity. He tells Kiwoo that he has been tutoring a teenage daughter of a wealthy family, and he is leaving to study abroad but is in love with the daughter, so he wants Kiwoo to be her tutor, knowing he will watch over her. Kiwoo knows he isn't qualified since he isn't in college, but Min promises to vouch for him, and so he agrees and has his sister Kijung forge credentials for him to take to his interview. So I thought this movie, the theme being the difference in classes, you had the wealthy and the poor people, and this movie does a perfect job on just showcasing just how poor this family is. They are sitting, they live in the basement of this place, and they even get free fumigation when the pest controller comes through. They just sit and let the fumigation clouds come over them. It just is such a stark contrast to, I mean, what I'm used to, but also just the fact that it starts off with this family in such squalor, you know?
Yeah, definitely. This film is a huge comparison between classism in South Korea specifically, but it can be applied, across the board everywhere. But this is kind of like the lowest class compared to basically it looks like the 1% in this situation. It's kind of setting that up within the first, 20 minutes of the film. The film starts out where the camera itself is going to pan down to the family, but it starts with their window, which is limited light coming in. But their window is actually the highest point in the frame.
And at the same time, the window is looking out on the street at ground level. So it's not as if they're looking out on, say, the sky or something. They're literally looking up at the ground.
Yeah, they're below ground level, which kind of is instantaneously showcasing their living conditions, that they're, basically the lowest of the low, and it's panning down to the family, specifically the son, where he's like, on his phone trying to find Wi-Fi because they can't communicate or even like apply for jobs without the Wi-Fi, and it's been lost. And you can compare it to, the 1%, that house, like their window, for example. They have like a huge window where, you're looking out and enjoying your lawn, and stark contrast to, you're viewing with I believe it's the Kim family. They're looking out onto the street level. They're having to deal with people like drunks, pissing everywhere on the streets. Stark contrast immediately in the film.
Yeah, even the toilet in their bathroom was on a higher level. And so I thought that was pretty interesting and weird how that was all set up. But it really does set a very stark contrast to where they're at and what's going on within them, and how the house is really cramped and small.
I mean, this film plays so much with such strong visual metaphors here, and throughout the movie, the director Bong Joon-ho always comes back to using visual imagery of going up and going down, and that representing the classes. Whenever you go up to the wealthy family, you're always going up. Whenever you go to the Kim's house, you're always going down. And even like in the bathroom, they have to go up to that toilet.
Yeah, and kind of hitting on that up and down theme throughout the whole film. Like they have to walk down to get to their house. I don't know if you noticed that, but they have to walk downstairs to even enter their home. In contrast to the 1% family, where they walk up multiple sets of stairs to even enter their house. So that ladder, it's instantaneously showcasing the living conditions of the Kims as they reside in that dirty concrete building surrounded by stink bugs. It's showing us the economic contrast right there.
So Ki-woo interviews at the very wealthy Park family, where he meets Mr. Park, his scatterbrained wife Mrs. Park, and their children Da-hai and young son Da-sung. Mrs. Park pays him a large amount of money and mentions that they also need an art tutor for Dosong. Dosong had a traumatic incident where he saw a ghost in the house and had a seizure and has been needing help with his art. Kiwoo introduces them to his sister Kijung, who forges documents for herself and goes by Jessica to become Dosong's art teacher. When the Park's limo driver takes her home, Kijung leaves her underwear in the car in order to get him fired and then suggests her uncle as the new driver, who is really Kitak, her father. The last position is that of the housekeeper, Moon Kwang, who has been working in the home since before even the Parks moved in. And in order to get her fired, the Kims exploit her allergy to peaches, causing her to have an allergic reaction. So I did want to say that, Chris, when you suggested for me to watch this movie a long time ago, I think one of the reasons as well that I didn't really want to watch it was because I immediately thought, even with all the trailers, it always looked to me like it was a straight up thriller. And I wasn't really looking forward to watching that. But man, was I wrong. Like, this whole movie is so funny. It's such a comedy. And this area, like the beginning all the way to this point when they're finally infiltrating the house, it just was so so comical the way that they were going about doing those things.
Yeah, touching on that, when he's getting his sister into the house, which that, by the way, that sequence of events all takes place fairly quickly in the film. So as a first time viewer, you're watching that like, wow, this movie's progressing very quickly. It cuts in, like, he leaves the house, he's going to talk to his sister, that cuts right back to her being there dressed up for her first, interview basically. But on the humor level, yeah, like they walk in and then the girl he's tutoring is jealous. She's like, "Oh, do you think she's pretty?" And it's funny to the audience and to the tutor, the brother, because we actually know what's going on in the background. But then too, the classism kind of comes into play again because the sister, she leaves her underwear in her panties in the limo, and instantaneously that family's reaction is to think the worst of their driver, even though he really hasn't shown any tendencies to be like that.
Yeah, and it just goes to show how little they actually think of the people in their life that are doing these things for them, the people that they've hired to be their quote unquote help. They are more than willing to just let them go on the flip of a dime, and they will switch out those people so quickly, and it just shows just how much they actually value the people in their life.
Right. I mean, like, they kind of create this worst case scenario, like kind of right out the bat, where it's like, oh, they're doing drugs in my car. Like that's that's kind of their go-to, where that really, I mean, maybe you can glean that, but that's like the worst case scenario possible from what's going on in that film.
Yeah, I thought he was gonna. I thought when the father or the Mr. Park found the underwear, I thought he was gonna assume that his wife was cheating on him. But rather than that, it was like, oh, the driver is hooking up with some girl, probably on meth. I was like, why would they assume that and not assume that the girl may have been drunk, But instead of that, they assumed that she was on drugs or, like hardcore drugs. And I thought that was pretty drastic for them to assume it like that. And I think it's pretty interesting how they always try to, they say, don't tell them the reason why you're getting fired, just make up an excuse to let them go. And
so I also thought it was really interesting when I was looking into the film a little bit more, and the director Bong Joon-ho actually decided that being a tutor was really the only way to bring two people of opposite spectrums together, which he actually did when he was in college. He was a tutor for a rich family, and he said that he got the feeling that, or he says, I got the feeling that I was infiltrating the private lives of complete strangers. Every week I would go into their house, and I thought how fun it would be if I could get all of my friends to infiltrate the house one by one. I mean, they always say in film school, write what you know, and that's exactly what he was doing here. And it just was so interesting to see how easy it was for this whole family to infiltrate the family. I mean, they're being literal parasites.
Yeah, it's interesting, with the housing situation as well. The one family, they're very, they have to be tight knit. The space they're living in is very tight knit. but they go to the upper class home, and they have the security system in place for outsiders, but once they're ingrained, once they're in the home, they take advantage of kind of the isolated family members, so to speak. Everybody's kind of doing their own thing because they can, but the house lends itself to be able to sneak around behind walls, or to even view things happening through the glass walls that normally they wouldn't be able to see.
Well, what's more interesting too, just talking about the house, is just how even the house is a representation of their class. I mean, every time they come home, they have to be walking up those stairs, and every time they leave that home, they walk down those stairs and down the path into the real world, just showcasing the level in which these people not only are literally, but also assumed to be over the rest of the world around them.
I think it's easy for them to sneak around because of how like oblivious the rich people are to their surroundings, and that they don't pay very much attention to what's going on and how the weird coincidences that are going on within that. I thought that was pretty interesting how they were just rather oblivious and in their own little world.
And the other thing I also wanted to bring up that I thought was really interesting was talking about the peaches, and Bong Joon-ho is actually, another thing I found that he said was that when he was in college, his roommate was actually really allergic, deathly allergic to peaches, and one would assume from the outside that a peach is just innocent. It's one of the most innocent kinds of fruit, associated even in Eastern Asian cultures to be a sign of good luck and fortune. And in this case, Bong Joon-ho uses it as this thing to be this thing that is actually deadly and that is a threat and can cause somebody's demise. And he said that when he was in college, seeing his friend be taken down and have a severe allergic reaction and almost die because of a peach showed him just how much of a weapon something as little as a peach could be used. And he put it in the movie.
Yeah, they weaponized that peach multiple times throughout the film. But yeah, as a viewer, there really isn't a clear villain or villains in this film. You kind of flip-flop between your feelings, because both these families are doing actions that we can't really morally justify sometimes. But as the viewer, you're kind of going back and forth throughout this film as they're weaponizing this peach to infiltrate the house and set up the worst case scenarios all the time for the current staff. So yeah, it's really interesting. I think what you kind of touched on, utilizing something that is looked upon as so innocent or more pure, a peach, a piece of fruit, as something so deadly in this film.
And to even go further, and we'll get into that in just a little bit, but something even as small and minute as a cell phone can be used also as a weapon, and that's what happens. And so let's get into that. The Kim family enjoys their massive increase of income, and when the Park family decides to leave to go camping for Dasong's birthday weekend, they take the opportunity to stay in the huge Park house for the weekend while the Parks are away. They spend the evening drinking and eating and making a mess of the place. And then when the doorbell rings, it's Moon Kwan. She claims she was fired so quickly that she left without being able to get something and just wanted to get it back. Mrs. Kim reluctantly lets her in, and Moon Kwan runs into the basement and begins screaming, opening a secret passage behind some shelves. She goes to her husband, Jun Se, who has been secretly living in the bunker ever since the previous owner moved out in order to hide from loan sharks. She gives him some food, and when Mrs. Kim looks on in horror, she tells Moon Kwan she needs to leave, and as Moon Kwan begs to let them stay, the rest of the Kim family, who has been eavesdropping, falls off the stairs and into view. Moon Kwan films on her cell phone, realizing the con the family has pulled. She threatens to send it to the Park family and uses that so that she and her husband can force the Kim family to do their bidding. This is when everything completely turns upside down. It's just insane. And something that was just so crazy to me was that when Moon Kwan comes to the the door and is seen in the camera, she's seen there begging to be let in, and it's almost kind of comical the way that she's so hysterical, yet at the same time you see that her face has been beaten up. That was the moment where I was like, okay, what has happened to her? What's going on? Things are changing completely, and it's about to turn into something completely different.
Yeah, right. Like the rest of the staff, we haven't interacted with them since they've been fired or left the house. But then, and we kind of assume that they're gone now, right? And she pops up out of nowhere. The family's been, lounging, relaxing, drinking. But that whole sequence of events that you just mentioned, Nick, that all takes place within like 12 minutes. I was looking into this too a little bit, and the script itself is really interesting. The script itself, all that sequence of events starts exactly at the midway point on the script for this film. It's crazy. But it's interesting because it's almost like two films are coming together, and those 10 minutes are linking both of those films together. And there's some emotional, not really, I get roller coaster. Yeah. So emotional acceleration happening in those events where they're all eating, having a good time, like, oh, we're well off now. This is, living a good life. The daughter's accidentally eating dog treats. It's still funny. We're still enjoying that time. And then I think it's Mr. Kim, like he's joking around with his wife, but it's kind of getting weird a little bit there. He's like, it's getting weird. But then the housekeeper shows up, and then the basement, we've only had like, I think 2 shots briefly in the basement. So it's kind of an unknown. So when she's going down those stairs, and we're like, oh, what's down there? And then how the filmmaking, again, when it comes to recording that sequence of events, I think it's a handheld camera following her down those stairs into, the lighting's changing. It's getting darker and darker and darker as she's going lower and lower and lower. But it's also staircase going down and ascending into lower class again. But we as an audience are hooked by that camera that's following her down those stairs. And yeah, kind of on that point too, I know we mentioned this a little bit earlier, you and I were before the show, how the lower class sometimes is fighting with each other a lot of time. Even in that scene earlier, the wife, she's like, yeah, if I was rich, I'd be such a good person, I'd be doing all these great things. And not even like 10 minutes later, she's down there saying that, no, I'm better than you. And she's lording her power that she has in that moment over that couple.
The bunker is lower than the basement. So in a way, where the Kim family lives, like that place is lower than their place. And so, yeah, at first, Moon Kwan was asking, them to take care of her husband, and she called her sis, called Mrs. Kim sis, and Mrs. Kim was like, "Oh, we're not sisters, or we don't have a bond or whatever." And then when the table flipped, when the Kim family falls over, and Moon Kwan is able to see that in the power dynamic switches, Mrs. Kim calls her sis, like pleading, hey, don't tell the Park family about this. But there's, once again, like, she has the power, and they're like, nope, we're not going to do that. We're gonna lord it over you because you didn't give us mercy.
Yeah, exactly. It's so interesting how quickly the power dynamic shifts, and it's kind of a lesson in what power does to people. Like every time that somebody's given power, you have the option to use the power for good. But as the director Bong Joon-ho is saying through this, is that every time somebody gets power, they use it against the other people. And that's exactly what happens here. Moon Kwan is able to take out her phone when the Kims fall down the stairs. She takes out her phone and starts filming them, and she then goes on to make them do all these crazy things for them, lording over that power that is literally just a cell phone and a button away from sending that and to the Kims and ruining their entire life. I mean, she even says, it's almost like I have the finger on the button of a nuclear missile, just like North Korea. And I thought that was really interesting. It also gave a location, a definitive location for the film being in South Korea, them bringing up North Korea and kind of satirizing the leader Kim Jong-un, that Moon Kwan kind of reenacts him also having his finger on the nuclear button. And it's just so interesting that, again, like The Peach, they're using something so little in this film, such as a simple text video message, as such a strong and deadly weapon, because literally they can, Moon Kwan with a push of a button can completely change the life and topple the tower that the Kim family has been building this entire time. So the Kim family manages to get the upper hand on their oppressors, locking them into the secret bunker. But Mrs. Park calls, saying that they had to cancel their camping trip due to the rain and will be home in just a few minutes. The Kims scramble, trying to clean up as much as they can, keeping the other two in the basement. They manage to do a good enough job that the rest of the family is able to hide while Mrs. Kim gives the Parks their dinner. When Moon Kwan breaks out and runs upstairs, Mrs. Kim shoves her back down the stairs, where she then hits her head and is severely wounded. Moon Kwan and Jun Se are locked in the bunker, and Mr. and Mrs. Kim end up sleeping in the living room in order to keep an eye on Da-song, who is camping out in the backyard, forcing the Kims to stay under the table, frozen all night, even as the Parks complain about Mr. Kim's smell and then later have sex. Eventually, in the dead of night, they are able to sneak out. They return home to find their apartment completely flooded with rain and sewage. Kiwoo takes the rock and the family has to sleep in a shelter for the night. Now, going back to the first part of this sequence, it's right as the Parks are coming back home. One thing that I thought was so interesting and such a powerful moment was right when they were starting to come in the house. And you had seen previously in the film that this huge house has what one would think to be an amazing smart home system, that the lights would come on every time Mr. Park entered the house. But what we see here is that even when Jun Se is tied up, he still gets up and goes over to a trio of light switches and turns each one on physically by hand as Mr. Park walks up the stairs, as he yells up at him, "Respect, respect." And it's just such a powerful moment to see that even Jun Se has this job that the Parks don't even know that he's the one doing that, but it just goes to show the difference in classes there.
Yeah, like we kind of touched on earlier, like he's still walking up the stairs to enter his home. He's still ascending. But it's even a more drastic comparison because you have the individual in the very bottom level of society turning on lights as he's basically worshiping him as he's entering the home.
And one comparison that I have, and it references actually one of Bong Joon-ho's earlier works, is that of the film Snowpiercer, which it's up there on some of my favorite films actually, and it also talks about the differences in classes, and in that film it actually it shows, instead of being a vertical distance between the rich and the poor as is in Parasite, instead it's a horizontal, where the lower class is at the back of this train and the upper class is at the front of the train. And when the protagonist finally gets to the front of the train, he actually sees Mr. Willman pull up a piece of the floor, a panel in the floor of the train in the engine, and he actually sees that there is a little child that you actually saw being taken from the lower class compartment of the train. You see a child underneath the floor literally being replacing a mechanical gear in the engine to make sure that the engine keeps running. And it just shows that in that movie that the lower class is seen as just a machine part of something bigger. And that's exactly what's happening here with Jun Se.
Yeah, it just goes to show that in order for the upper class to thrive and to have what they have, the lower class has to work. Like it's the lower class that makes everything work for the upper class, and they take advantage of that. And the thing about it within the Parasite film, they're oblivious to it. They're oblivious to how much the working class have to sacrifice and have to work in order to give them the luxurious lifestyle that they have.
And another thing I wanted to touch on here too is, again, like you have been saying, Chris, all of this stuff happens in a very short amount of time. And what is so interesting about this film and sets it apart from so many other films I've seen is that in a lot of other films, if another film tried to pack that much stuff in that short amount of time, I don't think it hasn't really ever worked out, in my opinion, before. This is the first movie that I actually appreciate the fast paced gate that this movie keeps going through, and keeps throwing stuff at you. And I for some reason I actually enjoy it in this case versus any other film.
Yeah, I mean, even the tone throughout the film is shifting so much, so fast. You know, the family's relaxing in the living room, and then it turns kind of more of a creepy horror-esque. And then there's still some funny moments even in there. But yeah, like the family is functioning as a unit again. They're cleaning up, they're taking down that couple to the basement. They're working together as a unit, and then there's so much to touch on, I guess, in this little amount of time. But just want to point out, they're all underneath that I don't know, futon.
Yeah, they're under that table. And what was so interesting about that table, too, was that when the director Bong Joon-ho was designing the look of the film, he actually made that table specifically. He said the only requirement is that the table be able to fit 3 people under it.
Yeah, that was a really intense sequence. I feel like the shift of the movie went from being like a light comedy to like a very intense kind of thriller for that sequence, because it was like, are they going to get find out, or what's going to happen within that? And so I was on the edge of my seat even watching that. I just wanted to point out, like, there was going back to a more of a symbolism, like when they were relaxing in the living room and joking around, the wife said that if the Park family was to come home, she would say that her husband would just like crawl around like a cockroach, because they were talking about how it would be nice to live in this house and be able to own it. And he even said it's our house in a way, like they own it in a sense. But then she said, "Oh, if Mr. Park was to come home, you would crawl around somewhere as a cockroach." And as we see later on, that's exactly what happens. They were crawling around like cockroaches. So I thought that was pretty funny and like was pretty interesting.
Yeah, kind of that funny theme throughout the film. It's still giving that to the audience a little bit, because even when they're underneath that table or what have you, the girl, she's like texting her tutor. She's like, "Oh my gosh, my brother's so funny. He's out camping," and then he's like, "Ha ha ha," and she's like, "I wish you were here with me." It's like, "Oh, I'm here with you, baby." Like something like that. It's like, it's funny though. It's still, even though it's a very intense sequence of events, it's still keeping it funny, interjecting that humor.
But at the same time, as he's texting her, he's also trying to stifle the fact that he's getting these alerts, and he's literally under the table, feet away from this girl's parents.
Yeah, and those parents, again, like, a little bit later on, they're having sex, but they're kind of acting out like a role play, I guess, that she needs drugs, and that's why they're having sex. And it, again, with that, or even like the kid, out in the rainstorm reenacting Native Americans, like, it just kind of showcases how out of it really they are as a family.
And another theme that keeps playing out here, and it happens here, is they're having that conversation about Mr. Kim's smell, and the smell that the whole family seems to have, that they just think is so putrid, and that actually comes out and plays itself out even later in the film as such an important moment.
Yeah, and kind of touching on the last part of that sequence of events that you mentioned, they finally get out of the house. They're going back home, and it's still intense though. It's still very intense. And as they're leaving, they're descending again, right? But the camera kind of zooms in on water going down a drain, and then we kind of view where that water is descending with the family as they're descending all those stairs like that. Every time I watch this film, this is the third time I watched it, but every time I watch it, that sequence of events when they're going home, it takes a few extra moments just to show the audience how low they are descending. And by the time they get back home, that water has completely wreaked havoc in their neighborhood, and they've lost their whole home, which is below ground level or street level.
And what's also so interesting in that sequence, I thought that was the most powerful sequence in the entire film. And the thing that I really picked on there was really the colors that Bong Joon-ho decided to go with in the editing here. A lot of the time in color theory, blues and dark colors are synonymous with cold and evil, whereas warmer colors are showcasing a warm tone, a lighter, more happy type of feeling that they want to invoke. But in this case, they actually turn it on its head. They decide that when the parks are when the Kims are leaving the Park's house, it's in a very blue, dark light, and that's exactly what they're feeling in that moment. And as they're getting closer to their home, their sense of security and safety starts to come into them as they're going down. And so, but at the same time, what they don't know is that they're descending into a literal hell. And that's what I thought was so interesting in the colors, because instead of going like a literal orange, Bong Joon-ho decided to go a bit more red, because they literally are descending into a hellscape that is their home, completely submerged in the floodwaters that have taken over their street.
Yeah, it was really unfortunate what happened with them, and also like people were taking things out their homes or trying to save what they can, and one of the things that the son of the Park family, not the Park family, but the Kim family was able to take was the rock that floated from the water. I thought that was kind of mysterious, but that symbolism of like that rock that was supposed to bring them fortune brought them a lot of misfortune.
Oh yeah, I was going to add, she kind of climbs on top of that toilet, which is still above the chaos within their home at that level, at that moment, and she just is kind of gives up in that moment. She's like, screw all of this. I'm just going to have a cigarette and I'm going to leave. She doesn't take anything with her, I don't think. Her other family members are grabbing, the rock, or the father figure is grabbing, I think, some medals. But that's it. She doesn't take anything except her cigarettes from the house.
So the next day, Mrs. Park decides to throw an impromptu party for Dosong. The Kim family, in their roles as the help, are invited and have to pretend that they don't know that there are two people locked in the bunker under the house. Kiwoo takes the rock down into the bunker where Moon Kwan has died, and then is ambushed by Jun-se, who bludgeons him over the head with the rock. He then enters the party, where he picks up a knife and stabs Ki-jung in the chest. The party explodes into horror, and Da-song has a seizure. Jun-se was the ghost he had seen in the house previously. Mr. Park screams at his driver, Mr. Kim, who is trying to stop Ki-jung's bleeding, for the car keys to take his son to the hospital. Mr. Kim throws them to him. They land under Jun-se, who is fighting with Mrs. Kim. She manages to kill him by stabbing him with a meat skewer, and Mr. Park gets the keys but expresses disgust at Jun-se's smell. This triggers Mr. Kim, who snaps and stabs Mr. Park, killing him. Mrs. Park faints as Mr. Kim leaves. This was when it went down. This part was so crazy to me. I mean, right before all of this goes down, you see the next day as Mrs. Park is getting ready for the party, and you see the Kims trying to help them, but each of them are grappling with the guilt in a lot of different ways. Mr. Kim, the dad, is really like trying to tell everybody, this stuff happens. You just have to get over it. You just have to this stuff happens every day and you just have to forget about it and keep going on with your life. Whereas the daughter and the mother kind of have a more like, we're just going to forget it ever happened. And the son, which I thought this was the most interesting part, the son is the one who actually feels the most guilt in this situation and is actually, in my opinion, about to give up what had happened to the daughter of the Park family, but then goes downstairs instead and ends up meeting his demise.
Yeah, I just want to add on that. I think we were discussing about his motivations, and I felt like he was going because earlier in the other sequence, he was asking his dad if his dad had a plan, and his father said, "Oh, I have a plan." But when they were at the shelter, his dad said, "My plan is to have no plan and just kind of go with it." And so I think the son at that point took things into his own hand, and it seemed to me when he was taking that rock down there, he was gonna like try to kill the guy down there and try to, I guess, get away with murder and, so that they won't be exposed for being frauds.
What I've never actually thought about it that way. I've always thought about it as he's bringing that rock that has brought fortune to his family. He's going to bring it to them and kind of as a gift to try and make up for all the actions that happened the night prior. So that's how I've always viewed it. But that's interesting that you think he's like taking matters into his own hand violently, because I really hadn't thought about it in that regard.
But what's also interesting then when everything goes down is that the people you actually see fighting each other are Junsei and the Kims. It isn't any of the people in the party, the rich people that are there for the party. They don't actually step in. It's almost like the rich are watching the poor fight. They don't want to be a part of it. They just kind of are watching almost as if it's entertainment. Yeah, there's some horror going on there, but they're not really stepping in and they're not really actually trying to get out of there at that point.
Yeah, it's kind of that, as is so common, that lower class infighting. And that's a common theme throughout this whole film, where the lower class is kind of, they're squabbling together, whether that's, early in the film or now. And then Mr. Kim kind of finally is he's sick of it, right? He's sick of everything happening, and he picks up that knife, and he stabs the owner of the house. He's in this kind of that volcanic eruption of his emotions throughout the whole film. He can't provide for his family properly. He's messing up the pizza boxes earlier. A fourth of them are bad. They're his fourth. We kind of get that. But and then he smells. It's all these different things that kind of line up, and they point to him doing this deed at the end of the film.
Exactly, which takes us into that last part of the film, which is Ki-woo wakes up in the hospital where he had been in a coma for weeks. He finds out that Ki-jung has died, and he and Mrs. Kim are sentenced to probation. There has been no sign of Mr. Kim, even though the police have been searching for him. Ki-woo leaves the rock in the river and observes the former Park house where he sees the lights flickering. Ki-woo translates the flickering from Morse code and learns that Mr. Kim is controlling them from inside the bunker where he is now living, sneaking upstairs for food from the new owners. Ki-woo writes his father a letter back, resolving that someday he will become wealthy enough that he can buy the house and their family can be reunited. This part, as much as we want to see something good happen for the Kims, it really is just a larger allegory that Bong Joon-ho is telling and showing the silliness of the difference in classes and how as much as you fight for power, you never can actually get it. And what's so interesting here is it goes a little bit back to the comedy of the first part of the movie, because when Ki-woo wakes up, he cannot stop laughing. And I mean, there's a lot of people that actually does happen to, is when you get hit in the head and you have a brain injury, a lot of people wake up and they just uncontrollably laugh. So I thought that was interesting. But even when he's standing in front of the urn of his sister, he can't help but laugh. And not only is that something he can't help doing because of his brain injury, but also, in my opinion, it's almost as if he's thinking back to everything that has happened and how it didn't matter what they did, they would always have ended up back right where they started.
Yeah, maybe he's kind of reflecting almost too that it's almost laughable, the things that they went through, everything they experienced, and they ended up worse off in the end.
There's a lot that happened in that sequence, and you think he's gonna succeed because you're seeing a montage of it all, and you thought, oh, this is what happened, and then at the end he's saying, oh, until then, just wait for me. And so you're left with, oh, it didn't happen. So you're like, is it going to happen, or will he be successful in it? And it kind of leaves you wondering about that, and you're hoping that it does happen, but it's really hard to accumulate that type of wealth to be able.
Yeah, and what's so interesting too is that if you actually listen to, if you actually watch the credits, there's a song that plays over the credits that Bong Joon-ho actually wrote the lyrics to, and the actor who plays Ki-woo actually sang, and the lyrics are talking about the journey that he takes to get to actually gain the wealth to be able to get his father to buy the house to get his father out of the bunker. And we don't know if he actually is able to finally do that in the end. You want to hope that he does that, but then it goes straight back to the last shot of the movie being him panning down on him looking at that letter.
I can't remember if it was the interpretation of those lyrics or if it was a separate interview with the director, but I was reading that because I was kind of curious, because I've watched the film 3 times. Every time I had like a different takeaway. First time I was like, okay, this is a literal translation of what's happening. You know, he does eventually go buy the house with his mother, and his father comes out and live together in that home. That was what I came away thinking the first time I watched this film. However, this last viewing, I was watching it and I was like, no, I don't think this actually happens. I looked into it a little bit because it was either the director or it was the lyrics themselves were pointing to the fact that in order, you know, especially now in the economic space that they're operating out of, it would take him, I think it was like 540 years or something at his current economic level to be able to ascertain that house one day. So again, it was tying it all together with that bow of the extreme wealth gap between everybody in that movie, that film. But yeah, at the very end there, it kind of ties into the beginning of the film, because at the very beginning, that first shot that we get introduced to the film is the camera starts out with that window, which is at ground level, and then it pans down to the son trying to find Wi-Fi in the house, right? He's hunkered over his phone, and then it closes out the film, like you mentioned, Nick, panning down from that window again down to the son, but this time I think he's writing that letter. But so it kind of has that edge of hope, but it also kind of symbolizes that he's right back where he started, if not worse off, and it's going to be a very difficult journey to try and ascertain that house.
Yes, a perfect and beautifully tragic ending to a great movie. So I just want to turn it now over to you, Chris. Was there anything in particular, because this was your film that you chose this week, and I want to know some of the things the thoughts that you had. So at this point, if there's anything else you want to add, I'd like to turn over the time a little bit to you.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I enjoy about this film is the symbolism. And this film does a really great job about expressing, you know, classism, basically, I guess, to the audience without slapping us in the face or being preachy about it. It does it in a lot of ways just visually, whether that's, you know, ascending, descending staircases, or even there's so many different things happening that kind of build up to it. Like there's even the houses that they're living in. It's a very, you know, Western style, very open, a lot of light coming through, kind of housing. And then you have that in contrast to below street level housing that the sewer water ends up destroying. Even the lighting in this film is huge with the symbolism. The window, for example, the main window that the Kims, I believe, they have, is it's on street level, and you can kind of tell like that lighting that light isn't going to be coming in for more than an hour probably all the day just because of where it's positioned. Whereas the other family, they have that huge window where they look out on their wealth. Food plays a huge role in the economics involved in this film. Whether that's the fruit that's being served on a daily basis compared to the kind of moldy bread that the Kim family starts out eating, or it's the pizzas. First of all, they're trying to make the boxes. They can't even afford to eat the pizzas. Later on, it's showcasing that as they're all working, or more of them start working, they're able to, afford that buffet. And then eventually there's a quick scene where it's showcasing that their boss, their pizza boss, who they're folding boxes for, now they can afford to actually go buy that product. So it's kind of showcasing that ascending order. I also looked into it. The drinks, the beverages they're drinking, they start out with it is the lowest, cheapest beverage, like it's a malt beverage, and then later on it's showcasing them drinking something with it's an imported Japanese beverage. And then even with the Ramdam, I watched Binging with Babish on YouTube. He does a really great piece on this where he's making meals all the time, but he starts out saying, hey, usually Binging with Babish takes a meal and then he bougies it up. But in this case, this meal has already been bougied up because the noodles themselves are 50-cent noodles. So it's a meal typically that is served and is made by lower class people, but the wife very adamantly wants sirloin steak within those noodles. She asks multiple times, hey, did you cook this? Did you make it this way? And it's even that meal is showcasing classism because they're taking a simple, really economic meal and they're putting that sirloin steak on top of those noodles, on top of the lower class. So those kind of things, the symbolism is really what I really enjoy about this film. Even the kid he's taking Native American culture and he can't recognize the beauty in that. He's kind of looking at more hey, running around with tomahawks. Same with the whole family. It's just one of those things where it's happening. Lastly, one of the big ones. I thought it was very interesting. After that huge rainstorm where they're inconvenienced coming back from their camping trip, and now they have to set up camp in the backyard. But the other family, they lose their whole house and everything they own in that same sequence of events. The next day, the Kim family has spent the night in the shelter, and Mr. Kim is helping, I can't remember her name, but the wife figure shop. And she's commenting on the phone, it's cleared up the skies. So beautiful. So it's kind of a commentary on climate change as well, I thought, and how different people experience that differently. Because, it's watered her lawn, it's cleared up her skies. Whereas the Kim family, it completely destroyed everything they had because that water had to go somewhere, right? So I think climate change is something that's very subtly hinted at as well in this film. So there's a lot of social things I really enjoy.
But at the same time, climate change is kind of a class issue here. It's the people at the top that really are caring about it and actually give a crap about it. But at the same time, it's the people on the lower spectrum of that are affected the most by it.
Yes, and it's kind of showcasing within the film all those different scenarios that are affecting the same people differently, or same thing that's affecting different people differently, including weather, food, what have you. So yeah, the symbolism, I guess, is what I really enjoyed in this film, and the visual symbolism especially. But also I enjoyed so many times film now is something that is very clear cut. You have a clear villain, a clear hero. As a viewer, we really don't experience that in this film. We have two families on two very different economic plateaus that are interacting with each other, but at the end of the day, nobody really comes away a winner in this scenario.
Perfectly said, Chris. Well, before we end, I just want to get your guys' final thoughts, reviews about this film.
Yeah, I thought this film was pretty amazing. It was very clever in the way that it used symbolism and how it used different metaphors to showcase its points, and it was very well acted. The cinematography was beautiful. Yeah, like I said before, like I give this movie out of a scale of 10, about 8.5 out of 10. So I thought it was pretty high up there in terms of how good it was, and very well scripted, and the pacing was excellent.
Yeah. I just remember, I walked into this film in the movie theater in November. I've been hearing, hey, this film's great, it's great. And then I finally went and watched it without watching any trailers. So I just sat down. I'm like, oh, okay, it's subtitles. Okay. Like all these things were kind of almost like hitting me in the face, like, oh, I'm not really going to enjoy this film. It's very different. But then I really embraced it. I decided I'm going to embrace this film. So I just sat down and watched it. It was like me and one other person in the movie theater, but it was an experience. And I was like looking over at this other person, and they're looking over at me, and we didn't know each other. We were the only people in the movie theater, but we were like hyped up about this film. And I just remember that event, and I've watched it now 3 times, but definitely my favorite movie of 2019. I don't really give out 10s, but this is a 9.5 for me for sure. Love this film, from the lighting, symbolism, like you said, John. Everything in this film really is a masterpiece. And anybody watching this film, I don't think you'll dislike it. You're going to have a good time regardless. You're either going to like it or you're going to freaking love it.
Exactly. And I am so thankful, Chris, that you finally are actually forcing me to watch this film because I probably would have been a while longer till I actually got around to watch this movie. But man, am I glad that you made me do it, because I don't... People have been hearing over the last few episodes, I don't really give reviews a 10 out of 10 or a star system, but I'm going to do it for this film because I freaking loved it. I would give it 9.9. It's one, like Chris, you too. It's my favorite film of the year, and actually going down as one of my top 5 favorite movies of all time now. It's a masterpiece. And Bong Joon-ho, there's a reason that he won. He swept the board for nominations, and then won Best Picture and Best Picture and Best Director at the Oscars, and then won the prestigious award. It was the first Korean film at the Cannes Film Festival to win the top award, and it was the first international film to win Best Picture at the Oscars. And there's a reason for it, and it's something unlike it's a movie unlike any other movie I have ever seen in my life, and I think it's absolutely going to change the way that films are made and written, and to me it really is just a masterpiece, and definitely the best film that Bong Joon-ho has made to this point. And if you haven't watched any of Bong Joon-ho's other films, please go do that. He's an absolutely fantastic director, and pretty much every film he's made since his debut has been absolutely amazing. And Snowpiercer is another, like I said, one of my favorites. So thank you, Chris, so much for making me do this. And before we leave, I just want to let you guys have a chance to give out your socials if you want people to follow you.
Yeah. If you guys want to follow me over at Instagram, you definitely can. I do photography part-time, specifically portrait photography. Username's kind of long, but it's christophers.snap.shots at Instagram. If you're in Arizona area, especially Tucson, Phoenix, hit me up. Let's make some art.
Awesome. And my Instagram is nick.fleeto.leach, so please come and follow me there. And if you haven't already, please join the Cinema Club Facebook group at facebook.com/group/the Cinema Club TCC. And every week we have a Discord chat that we want you to be a part of. In future episodes, I want to include some of those conversations on our podcast. So please go over there. Every week we're going to create a new feed for every everybody to talk about that movie for that week. So please go over and join the club and join us, join our conversation on Discord, and listen to us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, Podbean, and anywhere else you get your podcast. And thank you, Chris and John, again for being a part of this week's episode. And we will see you guys on the next one.